This year we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. He was born in 1770. He certainly is one of the most iconic figures in the classical tradition, and it is a real pleasure for me to talk a little bit about one of his early piano sonatas. It's the second sonata, Opus 2, number 2 in A major. This is a work which appeared in 1796. And the first thing to say about it is one senses that Beethoven's voice is emerging here already as a young composer, and that he is trying to carve out his sonic space to separate himself from Mozart and Haydn, the two epitomes of the classical tradition in Vienna, with which Beethoven really began. That is to say, he began his compositional career by absorbing the music of Haydn and Mozart. He was born, of course, in Bonn, not in Vienna, but he came to Vienna in 1792. His original plan was to study with Mozart, but Mozart had died in 1791, not long after finishing the Magic Flute, die Zauberflöte. And so Beethoven was sent to Vienna by one of his patrons, Count Waldstein, in order to study with Haydn. Waldstein said that he would receive Mozart's spirit from Haydn. And so Beethoven arrives in Vienna in 1792, and his first issue is to become established as a musician and as a composer. He was first known primarily as a pianist, and as a pianist who could improvise in extraordinary ways. The improvisations of Beethoven were considered by some as pushing the envelope, as sort of out there, perhaps a little too far. And his first goal was to sort of gain entree into the aristocratic salons of Vienna. A lot of these noble establishments had their own orchestras, their own string quartets, and their salons, and this is where Beethoven first became established. His very early compositions, perhaps including this Opus 2, number 2, were considered by some as perhaps a little daring. Now, it's fascinating that Beethoven dedicated these sonatas, there are 3 of them, Opus 2, to his teacher Haydn. We have it on the authority of one of Beethoven's early biographers that Haydn actually wanted Beethoven to announce himself on the title page of the sonatas as a pupil of Haydn. Beethoven refused. He did not want to acknowledge that he was studying with Haydn, but he was okay with dedicating the pieces to Haydn. So right there is a kind of sense that Beethoven was trying to, as I say, carve out his own space, find his own voice. So when Beethoven arrived in Vienna in 1792, he found it difficult to acclimate his lifestyle to that of Vienna, which was the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. The Habsburgs had reigned there for centuries. It was a court city, and musicians depended very much on a kind of patronage system. The idea was to earn commissions, earn position at court, or in the households of the aristocrats. There were probably about 1,000 or so aristocrats, and Vienna was maybe 100,000. So it was a very exclusive type of setting in which Beethoven was trying to establish himself. He was viewed initially as rather like a sort of country bumpkin. He didn't dress the way that Haydn or Mozart did with their wigs and their very fine attire. Beethoven was rather roughly dressed. His hair was usually disheveled, and he cut a kind of poor figure initially. He was aware of some of these issues. We know that in one of his diaries, he apparently made an entry to look into taking dance lessons, for instance, maybe to help him. There's evidence also that he was considering getting a horse so that he could become more of an equestrian. But he had to make it by his own will and determination, and he certainly did that. We're told by one of his contemporaries that the young Beethoven, even when he was in Bonn, was never out of love. But he, was destined never to have successful relationships. He never married. He had many friends, but he had many friends that he was always irritating, or they were irritating him. So he was, rather a social recluse. He was constantly moving around from apartment to apartment in Vienna, and he basically lived for his art and for his music. On one occasion, he was in love with a singer from Bonn, and he proposed to her, but we are told she declined because he was, quote, so ugly and half crazy, unquote. So just to give you an idea of this young musician arriving in Vienna and trying to overcome all kinds of examples of difficulties and misfortunes. Not to mention, of course, his hearing loss, which would be the great calamity of his career. The sonata is in 4 movements. The end movements, first movement and finale, are the weightiest movements. They fall into a sonata form and a rondo form. The middle movements include a largo, which is marked appassionato. So emotionally, it's really the heavy movement of the 4. The Scherzo, number 3, is in a light style. And here we should point out that this piano sonata, Opus 2, number 2, is the first sonata of Beethoven, and probably the first sonata of anyone, to use a scherzo instead of the minuet. Now, going back in the 18th century, Haydn had started to write scherzos in his string quartets instead of writing minuets, but he never tried that in his piano sonatas, nor did Mozart. Beethoven appears to have been the first to introduce it into the genre of the piano sonata. Scherzo, of course, from the Italian for jest, and so it is a humorous style, although again, Beethoven, because he's a dramatic composer interested in conflict, writes the scherzo with the middle section in A minor. The trio is in a kind of serious style, in contrast to the opening of the scherzo, so you might think of that as you hear it. We need to understand that Beethoven was essentially a dramatic composer. His music is always about conflict and resolving conflict. And he sets up musical conflicts in various ways. Everybody's familiar with the Fifth Symphony, which begins with the 3 short notes and the long note that are held. That's a classic example of how Beethoven can set up a paradox. There, the music seems to want to lurch forward, but it immediately stops in its tracks. And it takes a while for it to get going. In that case, the paradox is about time. Music is a temporal art, but Beethoven is setting in these arresting points where the music stops dead in its tracks and then starts again. So we don't really know where we are temporally. In the case of Opus 2, number 2, I want to highlight 3 ways in which Beethoven sets up these contrasts. The first one, which is the most obvious one, is the way he uses dynamics. Now, Beethoven was not averse at all to stretching the dynamic range and using abrupt changes in dynamics, much more so than had Mozart and Haydn. It's not that Mozart and Haydn could not fill their music with surprises in terms of dynamics. They certainly could and did, but Beethoven went a little further in pushing this. I like to say that if Haydn and Mozart wrote in a kind of Roman script with occasional emphasis using italic script, Beethoven's default script was usually italic script, but quite frequently he used bold script to make his points quite assertively, more so than had Haydn and Mozart. And so in this sonata, we get these sudden changes in dynamics. So in the first movement, we encounter the following passage. That is to say, he writes fortissimo suddenly, then piano, fortissimo, And now pianissimo, which dissolves into silence, and then fortissimo. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 dynamic changes in just about 8 measures. So the music is lurching from one dynamic intensity to another, as if he can't quite make up his mind. That's a good example of the sort of conflict that he sets up. There's another wonderful instance of this in the second movement, the Largo, which begins with this theme. Etc. Now, as we get further into the movement and we sense that it's winding down, we find this passage. Etc. There is a sudden, totally unexpected, out of nowhere fortissimo explosion as the theme comes back now with very heavy dynamics. And also, what we're not expecting is it comes back in the minor instead of the major. So the unexpected minor, the unexpected fortissimo instead of the soft opening. These are two things here that sort of sets us back. And again, we don't know where the music is going. Psychologically, it's quite unsettling to have these surprises. So a second type of contrast that Beethoven works on has to do with articulation, that is how the music is played, whether it is to be played in the detached style that we call staccato, or in a smooth connected style, usually known as legato. And the opening of the slow movement, again, is a wonderful example of this. The theme, he writes specifically, is to be performed tenuto sempre, meaning always held. So he wants he doesn't want any breaks in that melodic line. So in a modern piano, we try to do that by using judiciously little dabs of pedal just before the beats of the measure. In contrast, though, the bass line is marked staccato sempre, meaning always detached. So we have the held melody and the detached bass line. We put the two together. And there are other examples in the other movements as well, where he'll write staccati or legato, again, as if these two ways of articulating the music are in conflict with one another, rubbing up against one another. There's one other, the third one has to do with register. Beethoven is quite daring in the way in which he uses register to open it up. And the great example here is the Rondo, which begins this way. That's the refrain theme, which comes back several times. And every time it comes back, those arpeggiations, the sort of upbeat arpeggiation, are varied just a little bit. The point here is that this melody, which jumps by not quite 2 octaves, is really extraordinary. He could have written in other words, he could have used a skip of a sixth instead of this compound leap, which is from here to here. Had he done that, of course, he would have removed from the movement one of its principal stylistic features, which is this sort of playful exploration of these different octave registers. Beethoven was very much aware that register is something that can be explored as a composer, and he did not hesitate to do that. So basically we have these 3 sort of contradictory impulses in the music, the dynamics, the sudden changes of extreme dynamics, the changes or juxtapositions of totally different ways of articulating music, staccato, clipped, detached versus legato, tenuto, held. And then the opening up of the music so that it's using just about the full range of Beethoven's piano, so that we're becoming more aware of the importance of register. Is the music very high? Is it very low? And of the composer sort of manipulating registers to create his desired effect. Beethoven's genius was that he was able to figure out a way forward in which he could find his own voice. And we see that already in the Opus 2, number 2 of 1796.
you.